Hello everyone. So welcome to the fifth episode of the NgRx tutorials. So in the last episode, what we did is we created an action. This action basically took the whole contacts array and dumped it in the NgRx store. So on the dashboard module load, what happens is we actually dispatch the load contacts action, and this action goes and updates the reducer. We also created a reducer function which will return a new value of the current state, and it will also update the NgRx store. So whenever the load contacts load, and if you see, the contacts are already present in the NgRx store. But now the thing is, we had actually discussed the NgRx architecture briefly in the second episode. So there, what we saw was all the API calls that go through, it should always go through an NgRx effect. Okay, so in our case, what happens is, in the view contacts component, we are actually calling the contact list service, and this service is actually returning us the list of contacts. But going ahead, what we'll do is we'll actually create an effect and move all the the API call within that effect. So your component should actually be in touch with only the store. So it should only get the data from the store. It should not directly call the API and get the response. So what we'll do is, in this episode, we'll create a new effect. We'll move the logic for calling the HTTP get call into the effect, and then once the effect, once we get the response in the effect, we'll actually load it in the NgRx store. Okay, and then once it's in the store, what we'll do is we'll use something called as selectors in NgRx to basically fetch the data from the store and pass it to the component. Okay, so probably this might be divided into two separate videos, but in this video, this will be purely focused on the creation of an effect and calling the contact list service and getting all the contacts. Okay, so let's get started on that first. So if I just go back to the code now, so what we are essentially doing is, once we have the contacts, we actually load the contacts here, right? So now, before we actually create an NgRx effect, we have some dependencies for that, right? So first is, we need to have the @NgRx effects library installed. So for that, what we'll do is we'll say ng add, and using schematics, we'll say NgRx effects. Okay. Okay, so this is done. Now what it has done is, it has updated the app module.ts and the package.json. So package.json will basically update, it will just add the NgRx effects, and in app.module, if I go back to app.module.ts, so here, like the store module.forRoot, it will add effects module.forRoot. Okay, so now what we are interested in is, we are interested in the dashboard module, and for that we'll be basically using the for feature. So now let me just copy this first, and let me go to dashboard module. So if I just say effects module here, okay, 1 minute. So this should be, firstly let's import NgRx effects, and this should be for feature. Okay, so for now, let's keep it empty till we actually create an effect. Okay, so now, so this is done. So our project is still running. So let me just stop this and just check if the build is working fine. Okay, so the build looks fine now. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll just go back to the view contacts component. Okay, now the thing is, our intention is to move the set all contacts into the effect. So for that to happen, we need to have an effect file wherein we'll have to have a dashboard.effects, and we'll move the whole logic there. Okay, and secondly, to trigger, so we saw in the architecture that to basically trigger an effect, we need to dispatch an action first, and if the effect will basically subscribe to all the actions, and if it matches with a certain effect that we have dispatched, it will actually go through that effect first. Okay, and in that effect, we'll be actually calling the contact list service. Okay, so now before we move this to the effect, let's create an effect first. So if it's similar to reducers and actions, I'll create another folder called as effects. Okay, So although there's only one file, within the reducer or actions, I'm creating a folder so that, we can cover the test cases later on for all the files, whether it's an effect or an action or a reducer. Okay. So within the same folder, we'll have the spec file and the actual file. Okay. Okay. So within this effects folder, what I'll do is I'll create a dashboard.effects.ts file. Okay, so let's name it export class dashboard effects. Okay, and this will be, let's say at the rate injectable. Okay, and injectable is part of Angular code. Okay, so now this class will have a constructor. Now this constructor, so as I said, your effect will basically subscribe to all the actions that are being dispatched, right? So for that, there is one dependency here, which is your actions. And as if all your actions would be in an observable format, so I'm just saying action dollar. Okay, and actions is basically a part of NgRx effects, right? And the second part is, if you need, we can put store. So if there's, if you want to dispatch any action, and let's say this is app state, and store is also something we need to inject here. Okay, so we need to add the contact list service as well as a dependency. So we'll say contact list service, which will be of type contact list service. Okay, so this is done. Now we'll actually write the effect here. So we'll name it fetch contacts dollar because it will be an observable. And the way you create an action or a reducer, you have a similar function for creating an effect, which is create effect. Okay, so create effect. Once that is done, so as I said, your effects will get triggered only when certain actions are dispatched. So now to keep a track of all the actions, we have already injected the actions, right? So we'll make use of that here. So this dot actions dollar dot pipe, and we need to listen to certain types of action, and we need to run the effect only when that particular action is dispatched, right? So here we need to listen to dashboard actions dot fetch contacts. Okay, so only when fetch contacts is dispatched will this fetch contacts effect will it actually run. Okay, so once off type is done, we need to use switch map. Okay, it's not, for some reason it's not suggesting, so let me just import that. It's actually an RxJS operator, so I'll import switch map from RxJS operators. Okay, so switch map will take into account the action because we are getting that from the off type, right? And once that is here, we need to call the actual service, the contact list service, which is get all contacts, and it will return an observable of a contact array, which we'll use, for which we'll use the pipeable operators. Again, we can use the switch map here. So here we'll get the response, right? So once we have the response, we can actually load another or dispatch another action to load it in the NgRx store. But for now, let's just keep it blank. We are not dispatching any action. But let's say if the contact service fails, then let's say if there's an internal server error or there is some issue with the payload, then in that case we need to have, or we need to catch the error, right? So this will return an error, and we can dispatch another action here, but let's keep it blank for now. But going ahead, we can dispatch an action by basically, if you want to show a message or if you want to show an alert at the top of the page to notify the user that the service didn't work properly, or if there was an issue with the service, or if you want to navigate to a different component, you can always do that within the catch error block, right? Also, now we need to dispatch an action here to load all our contacts in our NgRx store, right? So the way you do that is load contacts. Okay, that's the action to be dispatched. contacts, and this will be response. Okay, so if I just save this, so our okay, so the last thing that's left is in the view contacts we need to start the action somewhere, right? So we need to dispatch the action for fetching the contacts. This dot store dot dispatch. Here we will say fetch contacts. Okay, and this does not take into account any properties, right? So your fetch contacts, whenever it's triggered, it will come to the dashboard actions.ts. Your fetch contacts is actually being listened in your dashboard effects.ts, because we have that off type here, right? So this effect will actually call the contactless service, get all contacts, and once you have all the contacts, it will dispatch another action to load it in the store. Okay, so I hope the flow is clear here. If I just save this, if I go back to UI, okay, so the UI won't load because we have commented out certain things, but we are more interested if the action actually got dispatched or no. So if you see, the fetch contacts action got triggered correctly. So initially, I mean, it didn't change anything. The fetch contacts did not have any reducer function. So the state remained the same here. But whenever if I go to the load contacts, it went and changed the contacts array within the dashboard state, right? So that is what our intention was. Okay. So in this video, we created the effect. We called the service, got the whole data and dumped it in the store. Okay. So in the next video, we'll actually see what are NgRx selectors and basically use those selectors to get the data in our component. Okay. So if you like the video till here, do like it, do share it with your friends, and do subscribe to the channel. Thank you everyone.